Atlanta, Geoff Collins is out as Georgia Tech's football coach, fired Monday in the midst of his fourth season after failing to make headway with a brash plan to turn the Yellow Jackets into a national powerhouse through branding and promoting Atlanta's big city culture. Collins was officially dumped during a meeting of the Athletic Association Board 2 days after a 27-10 loss to Central Florida left him with a record of 10-28 at Georgia Tech. Brent Key, the assistant head coach under Collins, was appointed interim head coach. He doesn't have much time to settle in. The Yellow Jackets are at No. 24 Pittsburgh on Saturday. Collins, whose team is 1-3 this season, finished with a winning percentage of just .263, the lowest of 13 full-time coaches in the school's history. Bill Lewis had been the only Yellow Jackets coach to lose his job during a season. He resigned after a 1-7 start in 1994 when it became clear he would be fired. NCAA RE-RANK 1-131. Clemson steps up, Okahoma takes big fall. Week 4 overreactions. Alabama, Clemson on the rise. Kansas schools make presence felt. Misery index. Miami still mediocre despite massive investment in Cristobal. Georgia Tech also dismissed athletic director Todd Stansbury, who hired Collins and provided steadfast support even as the losses mounted. Frank Neville, chief of staff to University President Ángel Cabrera, will take over as interim AD while the school begins a search this week to fill both positions. Collins is due a buyout of at least $10.5 million, the full amount remaining on the final 3 years of the 7-year contract that brought him to Georgia Tech from Temple ahead of the 2019 season. After leading Temple to a 15-10 record and a pair of bowl berths in his first head coaching job, the former Mississippi State and Florida defensive coordinator landed what he called his dream job. A native of suburban Atlanta, Collins said Georgia Tech had the potential to compete with the nation's top programs, even though he faced a tough transition away from the run-oriented option offense used by his predecessor. Paul Johnson's quirky scheme had helped produce 9 bowl appearances in 11 seasons, including a pair of Orange Bowl trips, and an Atlantic Coast Conference championship that was later vacated due to NCAA sanctions. He also managed to beat rival Georgia 3 times. Collins didn't come close to that level of success, and eventually his persistent references to the 404 culture, Atlanta's area code, and love of the South's iconic Waffle House diners earned him a derisive nickname, Coach Catchphrase. Georgia Tech struggled to a 3-9 mark in 2019, which was largely brushed off to the difficult task of switching to a pro-style offense. Collins went into his 4th season facing a brutal early schedule and little indication he could turn things around, especially after perhaps the most touted recruit of his regime, running back Jahmyr Gibbs, transferred to Alabama. The pessimism surrounding the program was apparent as Collins toned down his incessant promotion and conceded at the start of preseason practice that we're all tired of losing. The Yellow Jackets opened with a 41-10 loss to Clemson, got a brief respite with a victory over lower division Western Carolina, and pretty much sealed Collins' fate with an embarrassing 42-0 home loss to Ole Miss. That was hard, the 51-year-old Collins, his gravelly voice breaking. It was not up to the standard of Georgia Tech football. Unfortunately for Collins, it was pretty much the standard the Yellow Jackets displayed throughout his tenure. He never solved the rash of false starts and other pre-snap penalties that plagued the offense. The defense failed to show signs of improvement, despite Collins taking a more hands-on role. And, in perhaps the most troubling development, Georgia Tech gave up a staggering 4 blocked punts in the first 4 games, displaying an almost comic ineptitude on special teams. Of course, it was no laughing matter to the school's big money donors and disgruntled fanbase. Their dissatisfaction only grew when they looked longingly at the success of the state rival, the Georgia Bulldogs, who won the national championship in January and are ranked No. By contrast, Georgia Tech has lost 9 straight games to Football Bowl Subdivision opponents, unable to even be competitive against top-level teams. Under Collins, the Yellow Jackets lost their last 5 games against FBS programs by a combined score of 210-20. They were 1-10 against ranked opponents and 7-19 in the ACC. In what turned out to be Collins' final game, the Yellow Jackets outgained UCF 452-333 and allowed only 8 completions, but threw away any shot at the upset with another sloppy showing. There was a blocked punt, which was scooped up for a touchdown just before halftime. Jeff Sims was sacked 4 times. Linebacker Charlie Thomas was ejected for the 2nd time this season for targeting. 8 penalties proved to be critical. Stansbury, a former Georgia Tech football player, was hired from Oregon State in 2016 to lead his alma mater's athletic program. Stansbury dealt with attendance woes and a tight budget that only got more restrictive with the COVID-19 pandemic. But his regime was largely marred by the hiring of Collins and insistence that the program was headed in the right direction. The 61-year-old Stansbury became the first athletic director in Georgia Tech history to be fired from the post, having lost the confidence of the administration and influential donors who didn't want him involved in the hiring of the next football coach.